Well, welcome everybody. This is our monthly webinar session. We are having people still join us, so we're giving it a second, but we are today very excited that part of our Loft design team is actually sharing strategies and use cases and how we interact with AI and how we leverage AI in the design process. This is a combination of two in-person workshops that we did over the last month. So we have John Reilly, Saloni, Betty, TJ Lippert, and Nagi Snake joining us. And we are excited to kind of share how we use AI on a day-to-day workflow and how it can help in your design process. I want to also point out that next month, it's going to be a week earlier because of Thanksgiving. We're having Designing What's Next in Mobility, an exciting webinar with folks from Polaris, Flux Marine, and Trek Bicycle share where the evolving landscape of mobility is leading us, and I will be leading that. I'm going to turn it over to the design team, and let's get started. Also, if you want to keep up to date with our programming, we have case studies, we have articles every month. Subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll sure not spam you. Only once a month you get a nice tailored email sent to your inbox. So let's get started, and I'm gonna mute myself. Thank you so much.
Awesome. We're just gonna do quick intros about us. Hi, I'm Saloni Bedi. I'm an industrial designer here at Loft.
Hi everyone, my name is TJ. I'm a senior industrial designer here at Loft.
Hi, I'm John Reilly. I'm also a senior designer at Loft.
I'm Maggie Snook. I'm also senior industrial designer at Loft. Okay, so before we get started, we'll go through a couple of brief things. So we've been experimenting with incorporating AI into our design process for a few years now, and we have learned a lot of things. One is it's helpful to go into this experimentation with a certain mindset. So things like resourcefulness, curiosity, collaboration. It's important to think about all the tools that are available to you, not just the ones right in front of you when working with these things, because they're very unpredictable and new and always changing. So entering this mindset with a flexible state of mind is very helpful. And a few other things we've learned is it's not always faster to use AI tools. Sometimes it actually is more work to try to get something really, really precise. So we still do things the old way. The tools are changing constantly, so it's very common to open up a software and there's a new feature that we've never seen before, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And it works best when we blend it with our traditional non-AI tools. So we'll show examples of that coming up. We almost never use just AI for things. And then also understanding the appropriate level of fidelity is critical. So now with things like Midjourney, we can make something look real right at the beginning of the process, but that's not always appropriate for that time. So we're very mindful of what we were making. And we'll show a variety of AI tools. We experiment with a lot more than this, but these are the ones that we wanted to highlight. And today we'll walk through, so we ended up kind of showing the process backwards. And we did this because we want to show the types of things that we use the most. So it's basically our most common methods to the least common methods. But we'll start with visualization. And we have about 4 workflows that we'll walk through for those, starting with passing it over to John.
All right, great. So we're going to be talking about adjusting lighting and backgrounds with Gemini. So with this kind of tutorial, we're going to talk about just in general different tools that you could use for kind of fast image mockups. But then we're going to really narrow in to Gemini, and I'll share why in a bit. Ultimately, Gemini is a great tool, and just to go from the idea of like one rendering to a bunch of different ones to communicate different ideas. So this project actually stems from a real life project and brief that we received. So the project brief was all about creating visualizations for a DTC website, but then they would get repurposed for packaging, ads, social media campaigns, etc. So this is a real life brief, but this is an example of product. So it wasn't this exact product, but this is what we're going to use as an example. So just to quickly give an overview of how we used it, in general, clients, so marketing, inventors, genius entrepreneurs work all the time with the designers, the creators, visualizers, and sometimes we like to say mind readers. Ultimately, kind of early on in the project, there's these conversations that go back and forth. So it's like when a design brief kicks off, and there's always some kickoff inspirations for visualization projects. And then from there, the designers will spit back some design solutions. However, ideas and design intent are often lost in translation sometimes, whether it's just interpreting a design brief one way or the other, or just kind of like, okay, maybe that was the original idea, but maybe that's not the best idea after looking at it further. There's this really early kind of conversations that go back and forth. And so essentially we can use AI as a quickly and easily get a close kind of good enough image to show a rough idea. So the idea of kind of show, don't tell. So here are a few different programs that you could use. So we have Gemini, ChatGPT, Midjourney, VizCom. They all have kind of different interfaces and how you interact with them. Gemini and ChatGPT are pretty similar with a text image to image that you could use. And then Midjourney gets a little bit more complex, or the barrier to entry is a little bit more. Really understanding kind of different photography styles and how to kind of the nuances of learning that tool. And then VizCom's also a great tool. It's very much kind of like a guess and check kind of method, but in node-based, but it's still a pretty powerful tool. So here's kind of some positives and negatives after using these tools that we've kind of found. I'm not going to go through all of these, but ultimately, different designers and different users like different tools for their own reasons. Some people get more specialized in one or the other, especially now there's so many tools to use. So I'm not here to say which one's better than the other. We all have our preferences though. So I'll give you a quick example right now of just kind of what I used for that image for the Gillette Baldly razor. So the idea of the kind of post based off of what I shared earlier was trying to get something more dramatic from that image. So looking at a similar prompt for each of the different tools. It's interesting how they kind of spit out different results. Here's another example. I was trying to get something that was more lifestyle or kind of in context rendering, something a little bit brighter. Again, every tool kind of has its positives and negatives. Here's kind of like a brief overview that we've learned based off of like working with these tools. Again, analyzing kind of the positives and negatives. I think one of the things for this exact example of just kind of doing a quick adjustments back and forth, model accuracy is kind of a big deal. So that's something we really kind of aim to have. And then also having kind of good control is another big factor. So workflow one, I'm going to talk about kind of image to image using text. With Gemini, it's essentially the kind of workflow is generate, review, refine. And then, of course, after you do it a few times, you'll have kind of a nice output that you'll leverage. So when it comes to starting with text, you really need to start with an idea, but then also understand the language to use. So for example, it's kind of using different image styles, lifestyle and color to something moody and dramatic, something with some colorful pin lights, Understanding the language to insert is super helpful. I mean, these are just a few examples. There's different ways you could also describe these. And there's, so ultimately it's having an idea and doing your research ahead of time will make things a lot smoother. So here's kind of the quick start. So it's super simple, easy to use. You drag in your image and then kind of insert your prompt. So this one, make the lighting for the image just more dramatic. I kept it vague just to kind of see what it would come out. So from there, Gen 1, ultimately kind of the idea here was like the white background wasn't really dramatic enough. So if I'm going to try to have something a little bit more moodier, I'm going to look for a dark background. So all you have to do really is just say, thanks, can you put it in the black background? And so that was the output from that. So the black background actually wasn't as dark as I wanted. I kind of wanted to go for pure black. So I asked to kind of refine with the text, can you make the background even darker? Ultimately, this was kind of the output again. But so the idea here is really understanding like refinement can only go so far with these tools. And sometimes you have to take a step back and be like, okay, this is good enough to explain this idea quickly. And it's a good way to understand visually what it could be. Sometimes instead of spending like another 30 minutes to push it, this is, good enough to kind of move on. So another kind of exploration I wanted to do from here was to kind of, maybe there's a way we could bump up the contrast and just bump up some of those highlights. With that, you can use the redo feature if you're not getting the initial result that you liked. Ultimately the contrast was looking too bright in those certain areas. Just as like a quick review for this little mini workflow, Gen 1, Gen 3, Gen 6, they're all pretty different. I mean, Gen 3 and Gen 6 are pretty similar, but you can see that one's brighter than the other. Ultimately, if you were going to send this off to a design firm or a design firm to send it to a client, this is a quick and easy way to be like, okay, is this really what we want or want to show? It's just kind of a brief overview. One of the things that I was looking for was to create kind of a different maybe lighting method. Let's say we wanted to explore that instead of just like the black and white. One thing that's trendy is kind of the orange and blue pin lights. So, essentially, it gave me what I was looking for this one. So there was no real kind of refinements needed. So from there, to enhance the mood, maybe we can try it in context. So we landed in a good spot with the lighting, but one of the things that is kind of finicky with Gemini sometimes is, and even chat is pretty similar. It, collects all the prompts that you've had before. So sometimes it's best to even just like kind of start over. So just saving that image and inputting it as a new prompt is a good way to work. So for Gen 10 and 11, this is kind of what it spat out. I wasn't super happy with it. Razors aren't typically floating on the counter. They're usually lying on the counter. But if we were looking for that kind of the blue and orange highlights in this kind of moody bathroom, I think it achieved the coloring at least. So one of the things you can do is do the update text feature. So you just go back and adjust the text, and then it'll spit out kind of a new in context image. So in this example, I kind of specified kind of it on the counter and the towel and soap dish. So again, this is kind of another just review of two different options that you could potentially send over, even as a group of, hey, this is what it would look like on a solid background, and then this would look like in context. Use one for social media, use one for kind of online. So So that's workflow one. Workflow two is using a reference image. So leveraging reference images makes things super easy. So it's along the lines of kind of a similar process. This is just, I think, Gemini in general. It's generate, review, refine. However, having the reference image really gives you more control. So with this, a good way to start, again, is to really understand what you're trying to go for. So Pinterest is a great way to get some inspiration or some reference imagery here. Here's a few examples of, again, doing something maybe more moody. It's good to try out different images sometimes to get kind of something that you're looking for, because sometimes it'll interpret one thing over the other. So it's good sometimes to really like establish a mood board. And the great thing with Pinterest is it's, it already has built-in mood board. So that makes it quick and easy. So here's a quick example of something more dramatic. So that was the inspiration image that I put in with it. All it is, quick and easy. Can you make the image of this razor change the background to be more dramatic? And then I said, can you reference the second image as inspiration? So again, it kind of creates this more moody, dramatic, and if you wanted to push it further or come up with a different inspiration image, you could do so as well. But it spat out something pretty simple from the get-go. And then you can use it again for different applications and different inspiration images. For this example, it kind of spat out some kind of bright neon pin lights. So one of the things we wanted to explore was something that was like dramatic, but also kind of in context. So it was pushing it. So the rocks right now are really trendy to render products in. So it was interesting to see that Gemini almost exactly replaced the product itself with it, and then actually edited the drop shadow in the background. So if I were to send this off, or at least view it and be like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, this is something good to see. You maybe would have to readjust it for later, but as a starting point, again, this is good. Another example is doing something a little bit more playful. There was like initial concept for this razor that was, bald heads. So there was balloons. And so it was kind of riffing off of that theory. You can also play with some effects. Sometimes it's, maybe not the best thing in the world because maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't make sense, but ultimately it does have an opportunity to do so. And then the last one here is another kind of in context. The idea here was I even added like another layer to it. So asking to use shaving cream instead of the foamy shampoo. All this being said, I think workflow 2 is highly recommended if you're looking to explore and iterate. But then you could also combine it with workflow 1 if you want to try to like get a little bit more nitty gritty. Ultimately, this is like a really quick and easy way. Kind of the workflow 2 generations, did all of those in like maybe 10 minutes, like max. So it's a great way, again, to just get a rough idea of what you're looking for, and just have that quick early conversation to really to then go into further development and refinement for high-res images. So I'm going to pass it on to TJ.
Thanks. So we wanted to kind of follow up in a similar fashion for creating other marketing materials or things that could lead to the generation of other marketing materials as kind of an inspiration inside of VisCom. So kind of similar to the workflow that John was just talking about, we're going to start with our finished design or a design that's really close to the finish line on a white background. Ideally, If this is your first time using VisCom, or if you've never really seen it before, this is what you're introduced to first time you open it up. There's a studio and a workbench. Today we're going to focus on the workbench. If you have a design that you're really close to being done with, or this finished design on a white background, you'll bring it in as an image that you'll upload directly into the workbench. And ideally, that render is going to be something that's really simple. So you have your product or the focus of whatever your render is going to be, and a non-distracting background. We found that the more that you have in an image, the more that an AI will reference everything that's involved in the image itself. So it's a little bit better to kind of have it on a neutral background to work with. So in this video, you can see that we're using the node-based system inside of the workbench in VisCom. So you're just able to hit a plus on the right-hand side, and then inside of the modify feature, quickly change the prompt, and suddenly we already have our design on a lab bench. Because this is a biomedical device, we wanted to show it in its initial environment of use. There's also some really nice new features with being able to create new views. So as you can see here, it's able to pull and kind of modify its own sort of right-hand side or left-hand side view of the product. It doesn't always give you the best results, so we wanted to show kind of a little bit of some trial and error with this as well. It's adding some features into the back of the product that we didn't really have in the design. This kind of goes to show you that it's only going to work with whatever input you give. We also wanted to try editing things, so we removed some rubber gloves over on the right-hand side of the video. So really quickly, you can see that we're able to create some images that we can use to kind of act as a prompt or act as a little bit of inspiration for other designers on our team. We're able to quickly get an idea across, even if this is something that's just going to lead to other work that's going to be done. It's a way for us to be able to kind of quickly tell the story within our group. Additionally, we wanted to see if there was anything that we can do with creating a little bit more context to it. So we wanted to see if we could add in the user of the product itself. So we have a scientist. It felt a little bit cliche, so we wanted to have one that was just kind of standing there in a lab coat rather than working with specifically some chemicals. The button to actually initialize the device and make it work is like kind of around the logo, so that's why we wanted them to be pointing at the symbol at the top. This device is also used in tandem with a computer, so we wanted to try to add a laptop to the side. Again, try and get as much of the storytelling in as possible. And pretty quickly, it's giving us some decent results that we can work with. In a short amount of time, you can have a mountain of assets to be able to kind of sift through, review with your team. You can see on the bottom of the image here that we're also kind of experimenting with a little bit of CMF, so because this was kind of towards the end of a project. There's a lot of really neat new features inside of VisCom that you can work with. And we're not going into great detail in this particular example because there are a lot of tutorials that are out there. But we have some other applications of VisCom that we're going to show you in further slides. I'll hand it off to Maggie.
There's a question in the chat for both of you. How do you manage the scale of the product in VisCom?
I think a lot of it really depends on the size of the image that you're bringing in. So if you're doing a workflow, something similar to what I did, it's only going to know based off of what you're providing to it.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's already kind of like taking up the majority of the canvas of that composition in an image, it kind of helps to think about it like a photographer. You need to know like how big it's going to be inside your image to begin with, and then that's how it's going to play around with the scale of everything else that it generates around it.
Cool. And I think this next tip might help a little bit with the scale issue. So this is sort of building off of what TJ was talking about, but instead of working in the workbench, we'll be working a little bit deeper in the VisCom UI. So this would be, this is where we'll enhance the rendering with a natural looking environment. And one thing that can help with scale is adding in some environmental anchor points to the render. So we don't, instead of just having the product floating, we're giving it a couple of cues on perspective and scale. Still not always perfect, but it's the right balance. So this is a multi-step process. First, we make our keyshot render, then bring it into VisCom, and then we'll have to do some blending in Photoshop at the end. So this is an example of an environmental anchor point. So just using a countertop is really easy, but this could be anything, whatever helps describe the environment that the product will be in. And I mean, this is just a quick video showing keyshot, but this could be as simple as just making a shape in keyshot. It doesn't have to be fully modeled out like the product. So another thing we'll need before starting with VisCom is a reference image that is kind of similar to the environment in style. So I, for this, use the style reference. Actually, I know there is an environment reference, but I have better luck with the style reference for some reason. And yeah, so sometimes you'll see in this video, I did have to add a line to fill in the back of the countertop. So sometimes there's a little bit of sketching that needs to be done in VisCom, and going back and forth with it as far as how much the reference image is influencing the image is helpful. Sometimes if it's a little bit too high, it'll add like weird things like bread or candles in this case. You'll also see the VisCom will change the product, and that's totally okay. I just ignore that because we have our base render that we can use at the end. But you can see it pretty quickly gives us a nice little kitchen. So this is the one that I ended up taking out of VisCom. You can see there's some inconsistencies where I was generating different images on top of each other. So I ended up with a lot of layers, and all of this is really manageable in Photoshop. So I usually at this point don't put any more time into it in VisCom. So here in Photoshop, a clown mask is really helpful from whatever rendering software, but here we just start to blend the images. So there's a few things with maybe changing the lighting a little bit of the base render. Just all the typical Photoshop skills come in handy here. But after Photoshopping, this is what it looks like. So we'll do one more step. The lighting felt a little bit flat here, and I wanted to make it look more natural. So this is going back to the workbench, similar to what TJ was doing. We use that same tool, but to just adjust the lighting. So here, yeah, seen this demonstration before, but we can just tell it change the lighting to be warm and dappled daylight, and that can be pretty much anything. It's a quick video of what that looks like. And so I ended up using this one, which is obviously way too warm, but it was leaning more in the direction that I wanted. And then I did the same thing I did before with the Photoshop, where I just brought these all in as layers and then blended them together to get the right look. But again, I didn't want to spend too much time in VisCom when I knew I had to Photoshop them. And similar thing, we need to bring in our Photoshop skills. And so this was the render that I ended up with. And we'll do one more step. So I'll show how we can use that same modify feature to animate the rendering now. So yeah, really similar again. I think this feature changes almost every time I look at it, but you can just type in sort of what type of animation. So for this one, I just wanted the lighting or the shadows to move. So it's helpful to say like camera is stationary, but the shadows are moving. Because sometimes it'll try to move the camera around. But yeah, so you can see the shadows are moving just a little bit. It does change the product a little bit. So if this were to be used for marketing or anything, might need to do some editing, but it's pretty interesting. I'll hand it to Tony.
Awesome. So this my section is going to be about creating renders using, if you have already made the CAD in Keyshot itself, because we do end up doing a lot of renders in Keyshot. So they have like a new feature which is called the AI shots. And in this session, I'll be talking about the restyle feature and the background feature. And this is sort of like if you start off with a CAD, like a rough CAD, which you bring in, or like a finished CAD if you bring in, and then you can sort of use these tools to render the background and the lighting and all of that. A little bit about the Keyshot AI features, which is all called AI shots. They have like three separate sections. One is restyle, background, imagine, and then this is sort of like what the portal like looks like in Keyshot itself. The good thing about this is it runs locally on your computer, so you don't have to connect to the internet every time you need to use these tools. And then it's all like they're not training their data on your like generations, which is always good for privacy, especially like we do work with clients, so privacy is like a big thing for us. And then it does need some considerable memory of your computer and a powerful GPU, because since it's loaded on your computer, it does take a toll on the power. And then yeah, so you go from like different quality levels: low, medium, high. Low ones are of course like quicker to generate. So if we are doing like the low generations, we generally bring the images into Gemini or any other tool to upscale the image quality. And then the current limitation, which they're working on right now, is they don't store the generation history. So every time you close Keyshot, you lose all the generations. So it's good to just like save the images. And we can talk more about that. So to start off with the restyle feature, what this feature essentially does is it reads your CAD geometry which you're bringing in, and then it sort of like makes different iterations for the material, for the lighting, for the background based on your prompt. It doesn't have any image prompting right now, it's just based on text prompting, but it is understanding your model, which is really helpful, I feel, because it's not just like a 2D image, it's understanding like the 3D geometry. And then yeah, the current limitation here is like it spits out like an image, so you just get that one image. You cannot use the same image to create like a different angle of the product. So like the camera view is the view that you will get as an output, but that's okay to work with, I feel. So in this generation, I sort of used this speaker that we wanted to make like different marketing images for, and then it just has like a basic like material, like plastic black material. And then I sort of wanted it to be in like a minimal audio studio. So I used like a very simple prompt of like black device in a minimal audio studio. And these were some of the outputs it gave me, which were, these were like the good ones out of all the ones that were generated. But generally it does create like good images. It's not like a lot of like bad output. So that's really nice to see. And then you can sort of like mix and match Keyshot AI generations with Gemini. So I sort of used like one of the images from the ones that were created, and then I paired it up with my render from Keyshot, and then I just asked ChatGPT to, not ChatGPT, Gemini, but you could use ChatGPT also. I used Gemini to sort of like merge them, similar to what John had talked about. So what I wanted was like the lighting should be from the second image, but the product details, the logo, the UI details should be from the first image. So I just asked that, and Gemini gave me like a better image, which was really nice, because in the one that Keyshot had generated, like the UI sort of like got a little blurry, and it just had like not all the details that we wanted. So the combination is really nice, I feel. And this was like another just go at it to see if like Gemini can do this like for every kind of image that we want. So it does do that, which is helpful. But yeah, the details are still a little not exactly what was there in the model. So those might need to be edited later on, maybe in Photoshop or another tool, but sort of like getting the look and feel of like, oh, this is what I want like my render to be like, this is what the lighting, we can recreate it in Keyshot. So it's just like very easy way to get like different kinds of lightings and environment options, and then we can choose that, oh, this looks good for a product, and then we can go in and sort of recreate that in Keyshot. And then another way of using the restyle features, in the previous one, we just had the model, but you can bring in like more like 3D assets around the product to set up like a scene, and then to create like more like lighting and material options. So this was just like in a work setup, so a black speaker in a minimal audio studio. I used like the same prompt from last time, but I just had more 3D assets around it. So before it was just putting the speaker on the floor, but I wanted it on a desk. So this sort of like helped to create that setup. And these were some of the outputs from the AI feature. And then I sort of brought that into Gemini, and I wanted to see like how would it sort of like, because like in the generations as well here, like you don't get like the UI and all the features like to be precise. So I wanted to do that on Gemini, and then I figured that you could also like you could use the same prompt that like change the speaker in this image to look like the speaker in the second image, and then it does, and you can get like different views of the setup also, which was pretty cool. That like it had the speaker and it had like the environment setup. So you could create like more images which were not like what you get generated from Keyshot AI, and then you can get like different angles, but still have the speaker being constant, which is really nice. And then the second feature in the AI shots is the background feature, where like in the previous feature, you were generating like the lighting and the materials, but here it understands your geometry, it understands the lighting, it understands the material, and it keeps that constant on the product itself. And then it sort of generates the background image based on that understanding. So this was like one of the prompts where I just used the same view as before, and then I set a black speaker on a music console stage. So it sort of like generated this image where the background looked similar to the lighting of my product. This was another trial at it, where it was like more dramatic lighting kind of, and I wanted it to feel more dramatic. So these were some outputs from that. This was more like, yeah, it's on a pedestal, concrete background with Apple lighting. So you can get like, so you can go from like low to very high, like high quality. It just takes more time, but then like the higher quality ones, like if you generate in higher quality, like 1028 aspect ratio, you like the resolution of the product is maintained, which is nice. But yeah, that's about Keyshot AI, and then I will pass it off to DJ.
Excellent. So as we're continuing to work backwards through a traditional design process, we wanted to look a little bit at form development. So we're going to start by taking a dive into working with Midjourney to do just that. So we'll start with rapid iterative form development within Midjourney. The idea kind of behind working with this, and this is kind of a little bit of a different workflow, is that we need to kind of create a little bit of a sandbox that we can work in. So we need to create some constraints for ourselves. In doing so, to be able to kind of try to design as much as possible within one tool, we're trying to do all the majority of the early design work here in Midjourney, with a little bit of help at the beginning from ChatGPT. So in this instance, we're like working with a design team, or we're leading a design team that is creating a consumer electronics project for a Bluetooth speaker system from the ground up. So we're kind of making a smart speaker. And the only major constraints that we have at this point are the product category, so this audio product, and kind of the rough size. So a Bluetooth speaker, usually you would expect it to be something that could like live on a shelf or on a table. But then as a result, we don't have the form or the product architecture or even the controls defined yet. So if we're kind of looking for a little bit of inspiration, maybe from a different source, we could try ChatGPT. So we did just that, asking Chat to kind of help us out, and said, sure, we can give you some different ideas. So it actually spat out 10 different ideas along with some different details that would be associated with all of them. And from those, we found 3 that kind of stuck out the most. So this adaptive speaker, something that's modular, a privacy first speaker. So kind of taking the idea of a shutter that would kind of cover a camera and kind of applying that same thinking to being able to turn off the microphone on a smart speaker, and a smart projection speaker. So kind of thinking a little bit more about how it can be used as an entertainment system beyond just audio. As I was using Chat to try to drum up these different ideas, it was giving me different suggestions about how to kind of improve upon that. And it asked if we could generate some images to go along with all those prompts. At this time, I hadn't used ChatGPT for image generation, so I wanted to see what it would look like. So I said, yeah, let's do it for all 10 of them. And it just gave me one, this adaptive shape speaker. Not quite what I had in mind, and I'm not really sure where it was going with this, and this is the only image it gave me. So I decided to kind of move on and go into Midjourney instead. So taking some of the information from those ideas generated in ChatGPT, we took those 3 main ideas and kind of created prompts from those. And after reviewing all 3 of them, it kind of felt like the adaptive shape speaker was the one that stood out the most. So the privacy first speaker and the smart projection speaker kind of felt more like features that could be included into a smart speaker rather than a whole product. So I decided to kind of push those off the table and stick with this modular idea. So again, like we're saying here, headed in the right direction, but still not quite what we're looking for. So we want to do a little bit more form development. And some of the ways that we can kind of do that and initiate more of that form development with Midjourney is actually using a couple different tools that are baked into the UI. So what we're looking at on the left-hand side is actually the web layout for Midjourney. And the first tool that we wanted to highlight was the image prompt tool. So in this instance, you can actually bring in an image kind of similar to our workflow with VisCom that we were showing earlier. Having the shapes on kind of a plain background really helped to kind of allow the AI to focus on the certain details that you want to refine here. So in this instance, it's a game device that's kind of like floating on a yellow background. So you'll see in the image prompt in there's kind of this parallelogram shape. That's the color that they want it to be, along with a couple of reference technology pieces to kind of work along with that. So with the image tool, you'll notice that it's going to create something that's much more direct to what you're giving it versus the style reference, which is actually going to focus a little bit more on some of the details of an image rather than directly what's in the image. So it's kind of a neat way of kind of working in a different direction from the image prompt, where if you have something that you really want to draw inspiration from, like the overall form or part breakup, CMF of a reference product, then that can be a really powerful way to kind of move forward with some of the image generation. So we decided to focus on using the style reference because we're still thinking through different forms and we don't want to be too prescriptive with the AI just yet. We wanted to kind of help us create different forms and to think through a little bit of that. So we did just that. Kind of expanding upon that modular smart speaker prompt, we asked it to make a bunch of different forms. And yeah, there's a lot of similarities kind of drawn between these things, but they're all pretty distinct in their own way. There were a couple that definitely stood out the most. So we had this pair of cylinders down here. And part of the reason why it caught my eye was there was a little bit of visual consistency between these two. There's some very distinctly defined components, having more like a grill, a speaker mesh, some controls, some areas where the logo might be or an interface up on the top. And it was relatively consistent for a quick Midjourney generation. And deciding to kind of expand upon that a little bit more, we wanted to see what some of the variations could look like. So we wanted to use both the subtle and strong variations after using our last result from Midjourney to kind of look at some different options. So everything that we're seeing in the bottom row is actually a subtle variation, and these top two rows are more of the strong variations. So we're still kind of keeping it closely tied to our previous result, but expanding upon it a little bit more to look at some of these different details. The one in the upper right caught my eye the most, and as a result, we wanted to kind of clean up and separate these two speakers that were inside of the one image. So I brought that previous result into the Midjourney editor. So it's kind of a similar setup to the UI inside of VizCom or inside of Photoshop, where we're able to kind of bring in individual images as layers and select and delete and erase different parts of it. This was a little bit of trial and error on my part, and also modifying the prompt to kind of get us to a result that we could use in further image and style references. So with the main goal being that we kind of separate out the two of them, I brought in the same image over again, erased areas that I didn't want, and kind of positioned them in a way that I needed them to be, to allow us to kind of have a clean background that we were able to work with. There we have it. So in order to kind of continue with creating this story to inspire some other people on our design team, we need to have these in context views to kind of help show overall scale and where it might be used. Despite the fact that I was using that last generation of the two speakers kind of separated out on a white background as like the main reference, as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, it still generated these very different ones. So I wanted to have this kind of this sort of Japanese style inspired kitchen, so it'd be used on like a kitchen counter, for example. But it kind of changed all the speakers in there. So with that in mind, I did pick one that I thought kind of worked the best, and I went back into the Midjourney image editor. I deleted the stuff that I didn't need and brought back in our speakers that we like. Went through a process of just kind of erasing stuff that we didn't need, and in a similar fashion, kind of collage together images that are going to work a little bit better for the design team to kind of act as inspiration. And this usually kind of requires a little bit of bringing in images a couple times over. The Midjourney image editor kind of has a tendency for people to kind of like select whatever the top layer is rather than something specific like you would inside of Photoshop where the pixels are. And the lighting isn't quite exactly where we need it to be, but it's good enough for us to be able to kind of still get the story across. We need to kind of erase some of the excess around each of the images to make sure it looked a little bit cleaner final result. But yeah, that was the in context. Lastly, to kind of round out this story, we wanted to make sure that everything was communicated as a modular speaker. So we need to separate out all the different components. Again, we need to have a more clean background in order to kind of make sure that it's not going to create any distractions for the AI. As you can see, it really likes to make plants and furniture in the background. So again, this was a little bit of trial and error and learning on my part, but this resulted in me actually splitting things out, creating the cleanest background I could, and then going back in, bringing previous generations into the editor once more, and telling it, I want a white background. And finally kind of give me something that I could work with. Then as a result, from that point, we needed to actually do the work of separating it out. So kind of in a similar fashion with other stuff that we were doing in previous videos that you saw, we needed to actually take that image generation, split it out into its individual components by erasing the areas that we don't need. And then bringing things together in a way that kind of makes a little bit more sense for telling a story. The goal was to have everything kind of lined up in a row, so it's a little bit easier to read, easier to tell what's going on. And I had to emphasize it being a white, empty background with the background out of focus so that everything was directly on it. As you can tell, it'll still kind of take a lot of freedom, but what you're giving to it. So it helps to kind of have the right language and the right inspiration for the AI to work with. So we got pretty close with this sort of diagonal lineup. I think it might be in the next slide, but we ended up separating that out to be able to get everything all in one line, parallel to the view of the camera. But yeah, after kind of iterating a little bit inside of Midjourney, we have 3 images that tell a pretty good story of a concept that we want to get across to the rest of our design team to kind of provide a little bit of inspiration for this particular speaker. I'll give it back to Maggie.
Yeah, so next we'll show at a very low fidelity. So if we're trying to create cohesive concept sketches for multiple design directions with VisCom. So this is when really, really early in the process, we're not spending a whole lot of time on CAD or rendering at this point. We just want to make a large set of rough concepts to present to any stakeholders to start to get an idea of rough design direction. So here you can see at the bottom before, we usually start with really, really loose sketches and then move into really simple illustrations. And it's important for all of these illustrations to look equal. And so the goal of this process was to give them all a really similar material so that form would really stand out. So this has a few steps, but it's actually pretty quick. So we usually start with really fast, blocky CAD. So this is step 1 and 2 sort of together. And we take our really fast CAD, so maybe like 5-minute CAD model, and screenshot it and make these page layouts. So these are sort of like your anchor points for the sketch pages. So we have, each one has 3 views. So we have like a perspective, a front, and a side. And then we export those as images. And then for this exercise in VisCom, we'll use the palettes feature. So if you haven't used that, that's where VisCom comes with a bunch of styles that you can use, but you can also make your own by putting together a collection of images and then like training a palette and naming it. So since we do this so much, we have a couple that we'll use over and over. So this is like a simple base gray, so just sort of a nebulous material. And so in VisCom, we'll bring in the page layout that we made and then use the palette. And sometimes, like for the orthographic views, I did have to add a quick ground just using the VisCom sketch features. Otherwise, they got like very wonky. But you can see they're not perfect, but it works pretty well as an underlay, and a lot of the things that aren't perfect we can correct later in the sketching software. So the point of this isn't to get we're not trying to get all the details just right because we don't really want it to look too realistic. Just a general idea of the form and then the nice shadow underneath. So the next step, this is what we ended up with. So you can see there's a lot of little surface things that we will want to delete. So the next step, I used Procreate, but you can use whatever sketch method you're most comfortable with. But you can see we bring down the opacity of the underlay quite a bit, and then any details, branding, buttons, all those things can be sketched on top. So that really gives the designer control over what's being communicated rather than the AI, which is really nice about this. But it does bring it to life in a really nice, quick way. I think we got a question before about why not just use KeyShot for this? And you could, but what's nice about this is it's you can, if you have it palette trained, you can quickly get this whole page of renders at one time. So it just cuts down the time quite a bit. Yeah, so next we'll go into some secondary research with Celine.
Yeah, this is going to be a quick section about just like secondary research if you want to conduct some market research. Next. Yeah, so generally, yeah, research has primary and secondary. Primary, of course, like user research. So we do use the traditional methods because that's where you really need to talk to the users and understand them. But for the secondary research, where you can conduct market research, competitor analysis, technology research, you could be using traditional methods, of course, but also along with that, ChatGPT, Gemini, or Perplexity, any sort of like text-based tool that you would want to use. So here we're going to just talk about like the market research, starting off with the market research. So if for this example, I'm going to be talking about toasters, which Maggie had talked about. So like, how do you understand like what does the market look like for a toaster? Like if you're designing a toaster, what does like the market in the US look like? So this was my prompt, basically asking it to conduct comprehensive market research. To give me like different price ranges of the toasters and the number of buyers who lie in those price ranges, just for me to understand like what does the scope look like. And then also always asking for sources and data references, because if you put that in the prompt, then it doesn't make up any text or any information, and we generally always like cross-reference to see like if that's real information or not. And then a good way to basically get like all that information in a digestible manner is to ask it to arrange that in a table format with source links. So then it's easier to sort of like do that. So this is like one of the outputs that I got, where I was given like the USA's like pop-up toaster market overview, where it had like different metrics of like the market size, what does that look like, what is the market revenue, what is like the slice capacity share, which is good to know when you're designing a toaster, of how many slices are people wanting to put in the toaster and get those out. And then sort of like what are the growth segments, if it's the 4-slice toaster, like how fast it is growing, and different channels of where people are buying these toasters, and then the typical price brand. So this is like a very broad overview, so you can sort of like go in deeper into any of these. So I sort of went in and tried to understand like what are the buyer segments according to the price ranges. So like under $25, how many percentage of buyers are going for that? What is the buyer profile like who are these people who are buying this, just getting like a overview, like broad umbrella overview of like what does that look like. And in this, so you can see like the $25 to $49 mark has the biggest buyer share, which is 48%, which is super interesting to know, which I wouldn't have known if I didn't do this. So that was like good to get like this understanding early on. And then I can sort of like go in and see like who are the competitors in each of these price bands. And again, asking it to generate it in a table format with source links. So here I have sort of like two biggest competitors for each price band. So this is like a quick research. Of course, like we would go in and do more like thorough research because there is going to be bias here whenever you're using these tools, but it's sort of like a quick way to get started. So here, for example, so yeah, like which ones lie in $25? What are these like products look like? Going to their like wherever they're being sold, understanding like their reviews, what are people talking about, what are the pain points, what are the good points. And then you can also get different buyer segments based on the research that we've done. So like in the $25 price range, like what is the lifestyle and demographics of people, what are their living situations, what are their purchase drivers, and then some design implications. And this also, of course, like always going and seeing where the sources are, because the sources are generally market research, like bigger market research, which is done by different corporations or organizations. So yeah, it's a good way to like quickly get the right sources. And then you can sort of like based on the previous step where you have all these different like buyer segmentations, you can get like broader user umbrellas or like persona umbrellas. And this is of course not real people, these are like personas, but then this gives you like a persona that you want to find out real people related to that. So, for example, in this, if we go for Carlos and Jenna, who are sort of buying the $50 to $99 like mid-range toaster, so I would find the real Carlos and Jenna and then go talk to them, because now I have the understanding from the market. But now after that, of course, like the primary research where you go and really understand what the user is doing, talking about, what are their motivations. So then, yeah, so that this is just like one step you could do. And then the other thing for like the tech specs, which you could be doing, is like understanding the critical dimensions of the product before designing it. Like if you don't have an engineer, or if you don't have an understanding from the early on, like what does the internals look like. So here, for example, we have like different categories, like what are the tech or internals, what are the features or user experience, like main user experience points, what are the form influences, like what's influencing, like what the toaster looks like, what is the mechanism which goes in, what are some of the materials which go in, but also which are used to make the toaster, and some pain points which are just like the general pain points. So it gives you like, for example, here it was helpful to see like what are the base measurements of like where the bread slot, like how much should that be, what should be the travel of the toast, what should be the slot width. So all of those details you can easily get from ChatGPT, and then you can of course do your own understanding with a real toaster. So, but yeah, this is another thing that could help with the technical sort of like research part, understanding part. I think that was the last slide in our presentation. That was all we had today. Thank you so much. If you all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can use the mic to ask us.
Saloni, there was a question about, do we cross-check the data in the research? Like
yes,
the
of course. Yes, so that's why we always ask ChatGPT or Gemini to give us the source links. So then if we are using any information for our understanding, we want to for sure know that it's like real and it's not just like the AI making up information. So yeah, we always done. It's like I feel like without that, like we also have that like without a source, I don't believe the AI tool, because I'm not sure if you're making that up. So like without that, I feel like it's just like hard to believe now without seeing the reference links. And then a lot of times we do get a lot of this information from our clients. It's just like if it's some information that we have to collect ourselves, but like we always have multiple ways of like cross-referencing different kinds of information. And we do end up using like doing like a lot of physical stuff or like traditional methods. So it's just like another sort of complementary thing to all the skills. Should we stop sharing? Yeah, so for the industrial design expert question, there is an industrial designer specific ChatGPT, which we found. I'll just drop the link in the chat for that, which is pretty interesting because it thinks like, or like it's trained to think like a designer, or like the information that like a designer would need. But then you can also train your own GPT to be to ask it to think like a designer, give it like different sort of like analysis methods that use this analysis method to think like it. Basically, like whatever methods we would use in our real life, we ask it to like factor those in. What are the final? What are the overall improvements of a process with AI?
I feel like that's a very loaded question. So I see the kind of follow-up: time, quality, money, creativity. I think part of the reason that we wanted to show these different workflows, like the one that I showed, like with more front-loaded into mid-journey versus other ones, like the one where we were bringing in CAD into VisCom or into KeyShot and then into VisCom. I think AI is expediting certain parts of our process, but it's not replacing everything in that process. So that's kind of circling back to the point that we had at the beginning of the slides where we were saying that it's not always faster or improved, but in certain ways it is. It's kind of helping us make decisions quicker. And I kind of like to make the analogy of a photographer learning to use Photoshop to be able to kind of edit things. When Photoshop and Lightroom kind of like first came out, people were like scared that it was going to replace doing so much with photography, and it really hasn't. It's just kind of made the people who are doing the work a little bit faster, or improve the way that they think about things, helps them make decisions quicker. But that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, it can help you do the jobs that you typically don't want to do a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. I think one thing is, like, for this presentation, we showed various levels of visualization, like techniques, from something like very simple entry level to help kind of communicate the idea to something like high res, more like fidelity, more control. And I think that has been a big improvement, at least from my eyes.
Oh yeah, the in context images.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of ironic that for a software that's so difficult to control, it actually gives us way more control over making that type of asset, because before it was like, okay, you just search for days for the perfect image to buy online.
Yeah.
But yeah, being able to actually create one that is like sort of very close to what you want is amazing.
Yeah, especially when trying to show scale of products, having something that can quickly give you an in-context rendering makes a big difference. It helps, I think, clients and in general people kind of feel the product a little bit differently, or like understand it better in space, instead of always just seeing it on a simple white background rendered out in KeyShot.
Yeah, maybe it's communication that it improves.
Yeah.
I feel like those were all kind of like broad answers, but I hope that answers your question.
Definitely money, saves a lot of money, because you can do the job faster.
Yeah.
But you also have touch subscriptions.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Well, I think from a client and designer relationship, right, instead of like a lot of back and forth, you can kind of get there faster without going over budget for the design side, and then requires less budget from the client side.
It kind of feels like it's because we are still finding the ways to use it and to use it effectively. We have a generally better idea of when it is going to save us some time versus not.
Yeah.
But that's also part of the reason why we kind of have that caveat of the thing is constantly evolving and changing, and they're trying to make improvements on all these tools. So what we're telling you now might be completely different in like 3 months.
Yeah. I think one of the latest features that we unfortunately had to cut was, because of time considerations, was the CMF demo that you had queued up.
Oh yeah.
For VisCom. It's quickly being able to understand the different palette on different sections of a product quickly is a super powerful tool, instead of in rendering software like changing the color and then dragging and like, okay, now I'm going to try this combination and render. I'm going to try this VisCom has a feature that just will produce all sorts of things in a matter of minutes. That saves a lot of time.
Yes.
It looks like Jan was trying to respond to our answers, but we cannot hear him at the moment.
We can't hear you.
Does anyone have their sound on?
I think we have.
Oh, we do have the sound.
I have a question, if I may.
Oh, we can hear you now.
We cannot hear you on.
Oh, we can't. Oh.
No, I
heard
see.
something.
I see you talking on, and we can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Maybe you can put in the chat. I think Paulo had comment. Paulo, do you want to go next?
But the question is in the chat. I don't know, maybe that's another question. No, there are a couple of questions. Anyway, so I will add mine is, so are you basically doing what you were used to do just quickly, faster, or do you think the process has changed in some ways? So it's just doing the same things in a more efficient way, or are you designing in a different way with AI, or it's just about efficiency and saving time?
I think it's a mix of both, because like we are using them in the traditional methods, but there are some new things we do, like in some renderings, maybe you can talk about, like there have been like visualizations which couldn't have been possible without AI. So like liquids or
would have taken for that.
Yeah,
We never would have done it.
we would just not have made that render or visualization because it was in the middle of the process and we were not making like marketing renders, but like we used AI sort of to make some of these visualizations which were quicker to do, but it was like helpful for us to like communicate the idea across. So for sure, I think there are like new ways we're using like these tools in our process, but majority is traditional. So
I
Yeah,
feel like we design the same.
and I mean, it kind of depends too, because if you are trying to do as much of the design process inside of a AI tool, like if you're just trying to use Midjourney or whatever, just straight from prompts, then you kind of need to have the language to be able to communicate your idea. So it's almost like you need to think like a photographer and say, like, I want to have this camera focusing on this thing. It needs to be focused in a very specific way with this lighting. And so it still ends up, depending on how you're approaching it, then your process ends up being a little bit different. But for the majority of the work that we do, it still feels pretty similar.
I was just going to add, I'm a professor or adjunct professor at Wentworth, and over the summer, I was eager to teach a lot of AI tools. I was like, oh, I'm going to teach you guys this and that, and this and that, and ultimately, it came down to you really need to understand the fundamentals first. It's like, yes, you can use these tools, but without understanding kind of like the attention to detail, that is almost so fundamental to design. And that's what I think is a superpower for designers, is the attention to detail that AI often misses, right? At least for now. We'll see in the future, but at least for now, the attention to detail is so important. And that's why sometimes, doing things, I think Maggie's example of using all the tools, like, and mashing it up with Photoshop, I think makes a big difference. You really only know that if you know the fundamentals.
It's almost like the actual designing is the same, like the design process, but then the way we make assets is changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the end, it's sort of a tool in our tool belt. Like we use so many tools. This is just like another one where like you still need the designer's eye, as John said, you still need the design intention, without which it's very easy to get influenced if you don't have that like design intention. So like, and we never use the tools in that area where we are sort of building the design intention in the early stages. So.
Yeah, having a having a methodical approach is so imperative now. And yeah, we can't pass that up.
I think that kind of starts to address one of the questions in the chat from Arya, asking which approach leads to better outcomes when working with AI, providing comprehensive, detailed prompts at once, or developing the prompt iteratively by focusing on one aspect at a time. I feel like it depends on the tool.
Definitely depends on the tool.
And if you know, like to Sloan's point about design intent, like if you know what you want to be working on, then it goes a long way. If you already have some like gaps in your knowledge or gaps in your concepts that you want more input from the AI on, then if you're leaving it a little bit more open-ended, then it will start to kind of iterate within that. That was kind of the whole idea with the mid-journey workflow. I didn't know what I wanted for a form, so I just kind of let it go.
Yeah. I feel it's most of the times it ends up being iterative for me also. That like I start with a very simple prompt just to see where it's at, and then adding as much context as is needed. So it's always like a hit and trial each time to see what the understanding is by the tool. Is there a risk that we will end up with the same designs all over the world if we use the same AI tools?
I feel like that's where it's like making sure to not let the tool tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, keep sketching on paper at least a little bit.
Yeah. I think that also kind of goes into trying to cross-reference your concepts. So I mean, ideally, even if you are using the AI to do some research, you have an idea of what the existing market of whatever kind of product you're designing looks like. So you probably know what the biggest competitors out there are going to be. This is funny because it also kind of makes me think of there are kind of concerns about different websites that provide a lot of inspiration to designers, like Pinterest, and like having a very specific algorithm, and suddenly lots of different industrial design projects start to look very similar to each other. Not an AI tool, but I think there's other ways in which we need to be conscious of the design choices that we're making.
Which I mean, like AI tools are trained on existing data.
Yep.
So it's sort of like just remaking the things which exist. But I feel like with physical products, there's also like the whole angle of manufacturing it. Like you can any day design anything, or like you make a product on like ChatGPT or whatever. But then you still like if you have to produce it, it still has to go through that process of like you can't make very wacky things. But there might be some influence happening in the future.
Yeah.
No other questions? Gregor, Clotilde, do you guys want to add anything?
Not really. I think we're over time, but fascinating conversations. This is recorded, so you can always listen to it. I think we want to do more of these hands-on sessions because they're really meaningful to a lot of people. If you have any suggestions, reach out to us. Yeah, we always want to improve our webinars so we can serve the design community better.
No, well done, team. Thank you for sharing your workflow.
And yeah, keep the dialogue open. You can always reach out on LinkedIn, or if you don't have our emails, you can reach out through the website and we can get connected. We're looking forward to the dialogue.
Thank you everyone for joining. See you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.